Moving into a shared apartment wasn't exactly how he imagined his life after college would start, but rent in the city was no joke. At 24, with a decent job but student loans breathing down his neck, splitting costs just made sense. That's how he ended up living with Lisa, a grad student he'd found through a mutual friend. The first time they met was at the apartment viewing. She seemed nice enough, quiet, focused, the type who kept to herself. They shook hands, agreed on basic house rules, and decided they could make it work. Separate groceries, split utilities down the middle, and respect each other's space. Simple. The first month went by smoothly. They were like ships passing in the night. He'd leave for work early. She'd be buried in her textbooks. Sometimes they'd cross paths in the kitchen, exchange a quick "hey" or "how's it going," and that was about it. It was exactly the kind of roommate situation he'd hoped for. No drama, no complications. But then things started to shift slowly at first. He began noticing little things. Lisa would linger a bit longer in the kitchen when he was making coffee. She'd ask about his day, actually seem interested in the answer. He learned she was going through a rough patch. Her boyfriend of 3 years had just broken up with her, right before she started grad school. The timing couldn't have been worse. One evening, he came home to find her sitting on the couch, phone in her hand, tears streaming down her face. He froze in the doorway, unsure what to do. They weren't exactly close. But she looked so lost sitting there that he couldn't just walk past. "You okay?" he asked, even though the answer was obvious. She looked up, quickly wiped her eyes, and tried to smile. "Yeah, sorry. I'm fine, just my ex won't stop calling." He set his bag down and sat on the other end of the couch, keeping a respectful distance. "You want to talk about it?" And she did. For the next hour, she opened up about everything. How her ex was constantly texting, calling, showing up at her campus. How he kept saying he made a mistake, that he wanted her back, but only after she'd spent weeks trying to move on. How exhausted she was from the emotional roller coaster. He mostly listened, offering the occasional "that's rough" or "you deserve better than that." It felt strange, seeing this side of someone he'd only known as the quiet girl who studied all the time, but it also felt right, being there for her. After that night, things changed between them. Not dramatically, but noticeably. They started talking more, sharing stories about their days. She'd tell him about her difficult professors and research projects. He'd complain about his boss and office politics. The apartment started feeling less like a place where two strangers lived and more like a home. They fell into a comfortable routine. Friday nights became movie nights almost by accident. The first time, he'd been watching something in the living room when she emerged from her bedroom, looking exhausted from a week of studying. "Mind if I join?" she'd asked. He'd shrugged and made room on the couch. Now it was their thing. He'd be lying if he said he hadn't noticed how attractive she was. But he'd pushed those thoughts away from day one. Roommates and romance was a recipe for disaster. He'd heard enough horror stories from friends who'd gone down that road. Besides, she was dealing with a breakup. The last thing she needed was her roommate making things weird. Still, there were moments that made him wonder. Like when they'd be watching a movie and she'd laugh at something, her whole face lighting up. Or when she'd come out of her room in the morning, hair messy, looking half asleep, and somehow it was the cutest thing he'd ever seen. He'd catch himself staring and have to look away. His best friend noticed the change in him. "You're talking about your roommate a lot," he said one day over lunch. "We're just friends," he replied quickly. Too quickly. His friend raised an eyebrow. "Right, just friends. Look, man, I'm not judging, but living with someone you're into, that's playing with fire." "I'm not into her," he insisted, even as he knew it was becoming less true by the day. "Whatever you say," his friend said, clearly not convinced. The truth was, he wasn't sure what he felt. Lisa was funny, smart, and easy to be around. They got each other's jokes, had similar taste in movies, and could talk for hours without it feeling forced. But she was also his roommate, and she was still healing from a difficult relationship. Getting involved would be selfish and stupid. Around the 2-month mark, he noticed Lisa seemed different. Lighter somehow. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. One Saturday morning, she walked into the kitchen humming to herself. "Someone's in a good mood," he said, pouring himself coffee. She grinned. "I blocked my ex last night. Like, completely. Phone, social media, everything. I should have done it weeks ago. How does it feel?" "Like I can finally breathe," she said. "I spent so much energy on him, on that relationship, on trying to figure out what went wrong. I'm done with it." I'm done letting him take up space in my head, he smiled. Good for you. You deserve to move on. She looked at him for a moment, something flickering in her eyes that he couldn't quite read. Yeah, she said softly. I think I'm ready to. The following weeks brought a new energy to the apartment. Lisa was around more, making dinner in the kitchen, playing music while she studied. She started joining him for his morning coffee before work. They'd sit at the small kitchen table, talking about nothing and everything, but with this new closeness came a tension he couldn't ignore. He'd catch her looking at him sometimes, and when their eyes met, she wouldn't look away immediately like before. When they sat on the couch for their Friday movie nights, the space between them seemed to shrink a little more each week. One night, they were watching some comedy neither of them was really paying attention to. She'd been laughing at something on screen and somehow ended up leaning against his shoulder. He went completely still, not wanting to move and break whatever moment this was. They stayed like that for the rest of the movie, neither acknowledging it, both hyper-aware of every breath. When the credits rolled, she sat up slowly. I should probably get to bed, she said, her voice quiet. Yeah, me too, he managed to say. She stood up but paused before heading to her room. Thanks for tonight. For all of this, really. You've made the last few months so much easier. That's what roommates are for, right? He said, trying to keep his tone light. She smiled, but something in her expression looked almost sad. Right. Roommates. After she went to her room, he sat there in the dark living room for a long time, his mind racing. Something was happening between them, something neither of them was saying out loud, and he had no idea what to do about it. His friend's warning echoed in his head. Playing with fire, that's exactly what this was. But the longer he sat there, thinking about her smile, her laugh, the way she'd felt leaning against him, the less he cared about getting burned. The week after that movie night felt different. Not bad different, just charged, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy with something about to happen. They were dancing around each other, and both of them knew it. She started wearing less around the apartment. Not in an obvious way, but he noticed. Tank tops instead of hoodies, shorts instead of sweatpants, her hair down more often. He tried not to notice, tried not to let his eyes linger, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, he found himself making excuses to be in whatever room she was in. If she was cooking, suddenly he needed a snack. If she was studying in the living room, he'd bring his laptop out instead of working in his bedroom. They were like magnets, constantly pulling toward each other while trying to maintain some acceptable distance. His work started suffering. Not badly, but enough that his coworker mentioned he seemed distracted. He was. He'd be in meetings thinking about what Lisa might be doing. He'd be reviewing reports while replaying conversations they'd had the night before. It was ridiculous and he knew it, but he couldn't seem to stop. Their Friday movie night rolled around again. This time there was no pretense of distance. She sat close to him from the start, her arm brushing against his. Every casual touch felt electric. About halfway through the movie, she stretched and somehow ended up even closer, her head tilting toward his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. His heart was pounding so loud he was sure she could hear it. He wanted to put his arm around her, pull her closer, but the fear held him back. What if he was reading this wrong? What if she was just being comfortable with a friend and he ruined everything by making it weird? The movie ended, but neither of them moved. They sat there in the flickering light of the credits, both aware of how close they were, neither willing to break the moment. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Sure. Do you ever feel like... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Like you're holding yourself back from something because you're scared of what might happen? His mouth went dry. Yeah, sometimes. She turned to look at him, and the expression on her face made his breath catch. Me too. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. He could lean in right now. Close the distance. See what happened. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up. She hadn't moved away. If anything, she'd shifted closer. But then his friend's voice echoed in his head again. The warnings about roommate relationships, the reality that they shared a lease, that if this went wrong, one of them would have to move out, that he could lose not just a potential relationship but his home and his friend all at once. He pulled back, breaking the moment. I should probably get some sleep. Early meeting tomorrow. The hurt that flashed across her face was unmistakable, but she covered it quickly with a smile. Yeah, of course, me too. Big day. They both stood up awkwardly. "Good night," he said. "Night," she replied, her voice small. He lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, mentally kicking himself. What was wrong with him? She'd been right there, practically telling him she felt the same way, and he'd chickened out. But what if going for it ruined everything? What if this tension between them was better than whatever disaster might follow if they actually acted on it? The next morning was painfully awkward. They avoided eye contact over coffee. Their usual easy conversation was replaced by stilted small talk. She disappeared into her room early, claiming she had a lot of studying to do. The rest of the weekend was more of the same. They moved around the apartment like ghosts there, but not really present. He hated it. In trying to preserve what they had, he'd managed to break it anyway. By Monday, the tension had gotten worse instead of better. She'd stopped trying to make conversation. When they were in the same room, she'd barely acknowledge him beyond a polite nod. It felt like living with a stranger again, and he realized with a sinking feeling that this was somehow worse than if they'd just taken the risk. Tuesday evening, he came home to find her apartment hunting on her laptop. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. She didn't look up. "Looking at apartments. Maybe getting my own place would be better." "Lisa, you don't have to do that, don't I?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes were tired. "This isn't working anymore. We both know it. It's working fine." "No, it's not. We can barely look at each other. We've been tiptoeing around whatever this is for weeks, and now we can't even be in the same room comfortably. Something has to change." He sat down on the couch, running his hands through his hair. "I'm sorry about Friday. I shouldn't have pulled away like that." "Why did you?" "Because I was scared," he admitted. "Because if we try this and it doesn't work out, everything falls apart. The apartment, our friendship, all of it. That's a lot to risk." She closed her laptop and turned to face him fully. "And what if we don't try? What then? We just keep pretending we don't feel whatever this is until one of us moves out anyway? That's not a risk, that's just slow torture." He didn't have an answer for that. She stood up, grabbing her laptop. "I'm tired of playing it safe. I spent 3 years in a relationship where I made myself smaller, where I ignored what I wanted because it was easier than rocking the boat. I'm not doing that anymore, not even with myself." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I like you. I have for weeks now. And I think you like me too, but you're too worried about all the what-ifs to do anything about it. So I'm done waiting around for you to figure it out. I'll start looking for a new place. We can finish out the lease as roommates who don't speak, and then we can both move on with our lives." She walked toward her bedroom, and panic flooded through him. This was it, the moment where everything changed one way or another. "Wait," he called out. She stopped but didn't turn around. "You're right, about all of it. I do like you. I have since I don't even know when. And you're right that I've been too scared to do anything about it." She turned around slowly, her expression guarded. "I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong," he continued. "But I haven't been thinking about what happens if I do nothing, which is apparently this, which is worse than any hypothetical disaster I've been imagining." "So what are you saying?" she asked, echoing his earlier question. "I'm saying I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm terrified, but I don't want you to move out. And I don't want to spend another week barely talking to you because we're both too scared to be honest." A small smile tugged at her lips. "That's not exactly a declaration of love. It's a declaration of something," he said, standing up. "Can that be enough for now?" She walked back toward him, stopping a few feet away. "What does that mean, practically speaking? What changes?" "I don't know. Everything? Nothing? We figure it out as we go?" She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "You're really bad at this, you know that?" "The worst," he agreed. She took another step closer. "My ex always had all the answers. He knew exactly what he wanted, exactly how things should be, no room for discussion. It was suffocating. I definitely don't have all the answers. I know. I think that's what I like about you." She was close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes. "So we take it slow? See what happens?" "Yeah, if that works for you." "It works for me." They stood there, inches apart. The tension from before returning, but different now. Acknowledged, mutual, out in the open. "For the record," she said softly, "I'm still scared too. But I'm more scared of wondering what if." "Me too," he admitted. She smiled properly then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in days. "So what now? Movie Friday?" She laughed. "Movie Friday." The next few days were strange in the best possible way. They hadn't defined what they were exactly, but something had shifted. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a different kind of tension. The good kind. The kind that made his stomach flip when she walked into a room. They were more careful with each other, but in a good way. Like they both knew they were holding something fragile and didn't want to drop it. She'd catch his eye across the room and smile. He'd brush past her in the kitchen and feel electricity run through him. It was torture and amazing all at once. Friday came around again, and this time there was no pretending it was just a casual movie night. They both knew something was going to happen. The question was what? She'd ordered takeout, his favorite place, without him even asking. They settled on the couch with their food, closer than friends but not quite touching. The movie played, but he couldn't tell you a single thing about the plot. All his attention was on her, the way she laughed at the funny parts, the way she'd steal glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. About an hour in, she set her empty container on the coffee table and settled back into the couch. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned against him. Unlike last time, he didn't freeze. He put his arm around her shoulders and she snuggled in closer. It felt perfect, natural, like this was exactly where they were supposed to be. "This okay?" he asked quietly. "More than okay," she murmured. They stayed like that through the rest of the movie, and when it ended, neither of them moved to turn it off or get up. The credits rolled in the background, but they just sat there in the semi-darkness. "Can I be honest about something?" she asked. "Always. I almost moved out last week. I had an apartment picked out and everything. I was going to tell you on Tuesday. What changed your mind? You did. When you actually talked to me, told me the truth about being scared instead of just pulling away. My ex never did that. He never admitted when he was afraid or unsure. It made me feel like I was the only one taking any emotional risk. I'm definitely taking an emotional risk here," he said with a slight laugh. "I'm terrified." "Good. Me too." She tilted her head up to look at him. "But I'd rather be terrified together than safe and alone." He looked down at her face so close to his, and all the reasons why this was complicated suddenly seemed irrelevant. His friend's warnings, the lease, the risk of it not working out, none of it mattered as much as this moment. "I really want to kiss you right now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's stopping you?" "Nothing, I guess." "Then stop guessing," she said, and smiled. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them still a little unsure. But then she pressed closer, her hand coming up to cup his face, and tentative turned into something more. When they finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, she was grinning. "That was worth waiting for." "Yeah," he agreed, his head spinning. Yeah." She laughed at his eloquence or lack thereof and kissed him again. This time there was no hesitation from either of them. The movie had ended. The apartment was quiet except for their breathing, and nothing existed outside of this couch, this moment, this feeling. Eventually, they ended up just holding each other, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "We should probably talk about this," she said eventually. "Probably, but not right now?" "Not right now," he agreed. She yawned, and he realized how late it had gotten. "You should get some sleep," he said, even though the last thing he wanted was for this to end. "I don't want to move." "Me neither," but reality was creeping back in. They both had things to do tomorrow, and as much as he wanted to stay on this couch with her forever, they needed to be smart about this. "Rain check?" she asked, sitting up reluctantly. "Definitely." She stood up, but before heading to her room, she leaned down and kissed him again, soft and sweet. "Good night." "Night," he managed. After she closed her bedroom door, he sat there for a long time, touching his lips, replaying everything that had just happened. He'd never felt this way before. Not this intensity, this certainty that despite all the logical reasons to be careful, this was exactly right. The weekend passed in a blur of stolen moments. A kiss in the kitchen while making breakfast, holding hands while watching TV, finding excuses to be close to each other. They still hadn't really talked about what this meant, but words felt unnecessary. They were figuring it out as they went, and for now that was enough. Monday morning came too soon. He was running late for work, rushing around trying to find his keys when she appeared in his doorway. "Looking for these?" She held up his keys, smiling. You're a lifesaver. She walked over and handed them to him, then straightened his collar. The gesture was so casual, so domestic, that it made his chest tight. Have a good day, she said. He kissed her quickly. You too. At work, he found himself unable to focus. His mind kept drifting back to her, to the way she smiled at him, to how natural everything felt when they were together. His coworker caught him grinning at his computer for no reason. What's got you in such a good mood? She asked. Nothing, he said quickly, but he knew his face was giving him away. It's a girl, isn't it? Maybe. Well, whoever she is, she must be special. I've never seen you like this. She was special. That was becoming more obvious every day. What had started as a complicated situation had somehow become the best thing in his life. He knew they still needed to have real conversations about what they were doing, about telling people, about what happened if things didn't work out. But for the first time, he wasn't worried about the what-ifs. When he got home that evening, she was cooking dinner. Not just for herself, for both of them. Figured you'd be hungry, she said when he walked in. Starving. They ate together at their small kitchen table, talking about their days, and it struck him how couple-like this all was. How easily they'd slipped into this new dynamic. After dinner, she reached across the table and took his hand. We should probably talk, she said. Yeah, we should. What do we tell people? About us? What do you want to tell them? She smiled. I asked you first, he squeezed her hand. I want to tell them I'm with someone amazing. Someone who makes me laugh, who gets my terrible jokes, who I can't stop thinking about. Someone I'm lucky enough to live with, which makes this either the best idea or the worst idea. But I don't really care anymore because being with her is worth the risk. Her eyes had gotten a little watery. That was way better than your last attempt at expressing feelings. I've been practicing, she laughed, wiping at her eyes. I want to tell people too. I don't want to hide this. Then we won't. What about the complications? The apartment, the lease, all the practical stuff? We'll figure it out together. She nodded, looking relieved. Together. I like the sound of that. They spent the rest of the evening on the couch, not watching TV, just talking. About everything and nothing. About their hopes and fears. About how this had all happened so fast but somehow felt right. About what came next. Later, as she was getting ready for bed, she stopped by his door. Hey, she said softly. Hey. I'm really glad we took the risk. Me too. She smiled, then headed to her own room. As he lay in bed that night, he thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks, how scared he'd been of ruining everything, and how close he'd come to losing her because of that fear. But they'd gotten past it. They'd been honest, taken the leap, and somehow landed on their feet. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The next couple of weeks were probably the happiest of his life. They settled into their new dynamic easily, like puzzle pieces that had finally clicked into place. She'd study on the couch with her feet in his lap. He'd cook dinner while she told him about her day. They'd fall asleep watching movies, waking up tangled together in the morning. His best friend was the first person he told. They met for their usual lunch, and he couldn't keep the grin off his face. All right, spill, his friend said. What's going on with you? Remember Lisa? My roommate? His friend's eyebrows shot up. Oh no, dude, I warned you about this. I know, but it just happened, and it's good. Really good. His friend sighed but smiled. You're happy. I can see that. Just be careful, yeah? I don't want to see you both hurt if this goes sideways. We're being careful. We talked about everything. We're on the same page. Famous last words, his friend joked, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. But seriously, I'm happy for you. Just don't come crying to me when you need a new place to live. Noted. Telling his parents was a different story. He called his mom on Sunday, and when she asked if there was anything new in his life, he took the plunge. Actually, I'm seeing someone. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Tell me about her. Well, she's smart, funny, studying for her master's degree. He paused. And she's also my roommate. There was a long silence on the other end. Mom, your roommate? The girl you've been living with for 3 months? Yeah. Another pause. Is that wise? Probably not. But I really like her, Mom, and we're making it work. His mother sighed. I just worry about you. What happens if things don't work out? Where will you live? We'll figure it out. We have a plan. They didn't really have a plan, but he wasn't about to tell his mother that. Lisa told her friends at grad school, and apparently they'd all seen it coming. Finally, one of them had said. The way you talked about him, we thought you'd never make a move. But not everyone was supportive. Her best friend from college called one evening while they were having dinner. Lisa stepped into her room for privacy, but the walls were thin. He tried not to listen, but her friend's voice carried. I'm just saying you literally just got out of a relationship. Are you sure you're ready for this? And living with the guy? What if it crashes and burns? He couldn't hear Lisa's response, but when she came out 20 minutes later, she looked drained. You okay? He asked. My friend thinks I'm making a mistake, that I'm rebounding, that I'm setting myself up to get hurt. He pulled her into a hug. What do you think? I think. She pulled back to look at him. I think people who care about us are going to worry, and maybe they have a point about some things. This is fast and it's complicated, but it's also real. At least it feels real to me. It feels real to me too. They held each other for a while, and he wondered if this was what they'd be dealing with going forward. Other people's doubts creeping in, making them question themselves. But the doubts weren't just external. His own started surfacing in quiet moments. He'd be at work and wonder if they'd moved too fast. If the excitement he felt would fade once the newness wore off. If they were just caught up in the proximity and convenience of living together. One evening she found him staring at his laptop, not really working. What's on your mind? She asked, sitting next to him. Do you ever worry we're making a mistake? She was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, do you? Yeah. Sometimes. What specifically worries you? He set his laptop aside. What if this is just, I don't know, convenient? We live together, we're both single, we get along. What if that's all this is? Do you really think that's all this is? No, he said immediately. But what if I'm wrong? She took his hand. Look, I can't predict the future. Maybe we'll look back in a year and realize this was a huge mistake. Maybe all our friends who are worried are right. But I know how I feel right now. And right now, this doesn't feel like a mistake or convenience. It feels like something I want to fight for. Me too. Then we fight for it. And if our biggest problem is that other people are worried about us, I think we're doing okay. He kissed her, grateful for her certainty when his own wavered. The real test came a few weeks later. He was at work when his phone buzzed with a message from his boss. Can you come to my office? His stomach dropped. Those were never good words. He walked to his boss's office, running through everything he might have done wrong. Sit down, his boss said, which didn't help his anxiety. Am I in trouble? His boss laughed. No, nothing like that. Actually, I have an opportunity for you. We're opening a new office across the country. It's a promotion, significant raise, all expenses covered for the move. He should have been excited. This was what he'd been working toward, but all he could think about was Lisa. When would I need to decide by? End of the week. I know it's quick, but we need someone out there by next month. He thanked his boss and left, his mind spinning. A promotion, a chance to advance his career, everything he'd wanted when he graduated. But it meant leaving Lisa, leaving what they were building together. He went home that night, and Lisa knew immediately something was wrong. What happened? He told her about the job offer, watching her face carefully. She went very still. That's amazing. A promotion. Yeah. You don't sound excited. I don't want to leave. She looked down at her hands. When do you have to decide? By Friday. That's only 4 days away. I know. They sat in heavy silence. Finally, she spoke. You should take it. What? It's a great opportunity. You'd be stupid not to. But we've been together for 3 weeks, she said, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. You can't turn down your career for a 3-week relationship. That's not fair to you. What about us? There might not be in us if you stay and resent me for holding you back from this opportunity. At least this way, you go knowing you made the right choice for your career. He felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Is that really what you want? What I want doesn't matter, this is your decision. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Whatever he chose would affect both of them. If he stayed, he'd always wonder what could have been with his career. If he left, he'd always wonder what could have been with her. That night they barely spoke, both lost in their own thoughts. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the right choice was. He'd never felt so torn in his life. The next few days were torture. They were both trying to act normal, but the tension was suffocating. Lisa threw herself into her studies. He tried to weigh the pros and cons of each choice. His friend told him to take the job. His mom said to follow his heart. Neither answer felt right. Thursday night he found her crying in her room. He knocked softly and came in without waiting for an answer. "Hey," he said quietly. "I'm fine," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. "You're not fine." "Neither am I." She looked up at him and the pain in her eyes mirrored his own. "I don't want you to leave, but I don't want you to stay and regret it either. I don't know how to win here." He sat next to her on the bed. "I don't think either of us wins." "Not really." "So what do we do?" "I don't know." They held each other while she cried, and he felt his own tears start. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to have more time. Time to figure out if this was real, if it was worth fighting for. But life had other plans. Friday morning came and he still hadn't made a decision.